Alright guys, I've watched the Odyssey finally and I have a lot of thoughts about it. Put together this video because I have a bunch of notes that I wrote down that I wanted to discuss. So I'm gonna get into it and talk about all the things that I found meaningful about this movie. First of all, I think a little bit of context is needed. Now, this is Christopher Nolan's 13th movie, and is fresh from the success of Oppenheimer, which wasn't just a box office hit with nearly $900 million at the global box office, but also won him 2 Oscars, one as Best Film, one as Best Director, and bagged a total of 7 statues, which is just mind-boggling. Now, there's no need to tell you that expectations on this one were particularly high. So it's also no surprise when I tell you that from the moment the movie was announced, it was just one controversy after the other. But we'll get into that later on into the video. Now, the very idea of Nolan adapting a 3,000-year-old mythical poem felt preposterous, because Nolan, of all people, it's the guy that grounds everything in reality, and Homer's work is basically what is considered the precursor to modern day fantasy. So it felt like he was way out of his ballpark. But I would say, and this is not just from Nolan's fan, also people who are not particularly interested in his work, they thought that he could eventually pull it off, because at the end of the day, Nolan is the most trusted and respected director in Hollywood at the moment, and also he's surprised that with many movies that we thought they weren't in his ballpark, like The Dark Knight, for example. But so basically, everyone was hopeful that it would eventually create a global phenomenon, kind of like his own version of The Lord of the Rings. Now, it's still too early to say if he actually managed to achieve that. We'll have to wait a little over a month to see how well it does at the global box office. It's no surprise that the opening weekend has been massive, with over, I think, $250,000 or something like that. No, sorry, 250 million. But we'll have to see how word of mouth carries the movie in the coming weeks. Now, before I get into the nitty and gritty of the review, I want to quickly summarize the plot of the Odyssey, and I don't think it makes any sense to say spoiler alert, because we're talking about a poem that's been out for quite some time, so it pretty much would be like spoiling the Bible. Now, the story starts shortly after the Trojan War, so the one that is discussed in the Odyssey, which is the other poem by Homer. So everyone is going back home after a victorious but bloody war, and it's there was won thanks to the subterfuge of the Trojan horse. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, thanks Odysseus, which is his best and most clever general, for his efforts, and then sails the ship back home to reunite with Clytemnestra, which is Helen of Troy, half-sister, although in this movie they're actually twins. Now, because of his pride and also his thirst for adventure, Odysseus decides not to follow Agamemnon to get more supplies and then eventually go back to Ithaca, which is his kingdom, but to explore new and mysterious paths. Now, what happened is that he faces quite few complications along the way, and it took him a bit of time to go back home. Now, I would say it's not just that he experiences a lot of adventures during this time. He pretty much loses all of his men and nearly loses himself too in the process. In the meantime, Ithaca has become what is like a kingdom without a king, because basically Penelope, Odysseus' wife, is just still painfully waiting for his husband's return so he can get back on the throne. And she basically is trying to keep at bay and reject all of her suitors with a clever device that we're going to discuss later. And basically, all these pretenders, they just I don't know, they just enter Odysseus' wife every night and they feast like they own the place. Then there's Telemachus, which is Odysseus and Penelope's wife, and he's the natural heir to the throne, but he's still too young and mature to seek control of the island, especially when many people are still longing for Odysseus' return. Also, legends are circulating about the mysterious sea peoples that will bring another war upon them. So let's say like the situation in Ithaca is a very frail equilibrium, and anything can happen like in a second that would pretty much break the equilibrium and would cause like a war between the pretenders and also the natural heir to the throne. So it's also a little bit reminiscing of Game of Thrones in a way, which I actually really liked. Now, in the meantime, Odysseus is pretty much facing monsters and gods, fury of nature, also supernatural elements. And the more he does it, the more he explores these places, the more he learns about himself, and also the more he understands the consequences of the war he helped winning. So, in a way, he's also very he has an internal conflict, because he desperately wants to go back home to reunite with his family, to go back on his throne and return home to Ithaca. But at the same time, because of the consequences of the war, he's also fearful of what's he gonna find once he's back there. Now, this is pretty much the gist of it. If you need to know more details about the plot, just go on Wikipedia, or if you read it, even better, because I would say like most people know more or less what the Odyssey is about. So that's why I don't want to linger too much on this. Now I want to get into the themes of the movie, which is what I think a far more interesting conversation. This is in no particular order, but I want to start with one of the most overarching themes of the movie, which is the law of Zeus. Now, gods are often mentioned in this movie, and they clearly act in the background, but at the same time, the fact that you don't physically see them, it makes them not just more fascinating, but also more menacing, because you never know if they're actually gonna do something or not, if they're real or not. So you have to be brave in a way, because you don't know if you want to challenge them. So the law of Zeus is pretty much about treating other people the same way you'd want to be treated, because you never know if the person you're mistreating is a god in disguise. So if you mistreat them, then you have to face their wrath. Now, this aligns perfectly with how fearful people were of gods back then. So this was a way to control them and make sure they didn't misbehave. And people would go to extreme lengths to win the god's favor, even making gifts to the gods, or even human sacrifices. I don't know, like it's actually crazy how people would place their entire fate, their entire life in the hands of something they cannot even see. In a way, this is the Greek version of karma, and at the end of the movie it pays off brilliantly when Odysseus reveals that during the destruction of Troy, he really understood the magnitude and the horror of what they were doing to one another, stealing and raping and capturing and killing and breaking the law of Zeus many times in pursuit of what is basically just power and vainglory. The beautiful parallelism between the beheading of the Athena statue and the young woman who eventually follows Odysseus along the journey proves the impact the war had on his consciousness, and how deeply he was shaken by what he saw, and to the length that his fellow men would go in order to win the war. Athena, in a way, is more a manifestation of his guilt rather than, the goddess of wisdom, and she only disappears once Odysseus makes peace with himself. The ending sequence also was very, very moving, as Odysseus knows that he can stay in Ithaca, as by slaughtering all of Penelope's pretenders, he's broken Zeus' law one more time, and that's way beyond any forgiveness. So he has to leave the island, and he decides that he can finally sail with his beloved wife on his fastest boats towards the settling sun, and Telemachus is finally ready, is finally mature enough to rule the island as a king, finally bringing some peace to the island. Now, this is actually foreshadowed during the movie, when it's hinted that although he misses his wife and son terribly, deep down he doesn't really want to go back to Ithaca, because his deepest, most burning desire in his heart is actually to travel the unknown. And this, I would say, is the core essence of Odysseus. Then there's the theme of waiting, which is actually the very essence of Penelope. A faithful and patient woman who never loses the hope of reuniting with her husband. But Ithaca has become pretty much what's a snake's nest since Odysseus left. And, many years have passed since his supposed return. So naturally, a lot of men start courting Penelope, and eventually Penelope too start fearing the worst. We know that Odysseus is dead, and start realizing that maybe it is time to get married again. Now, to hold them at bay, as I mentioned, she devised a clever trick to buy some time, which is basically knitting some sort of thing that she would dismantle at night. So she would say to the suitors that once her project was done, she would find someone to marry. Now, Antinous, which is the sleaziest and most evil of the pretenders, uncovers her plan and tells her it's time to get married again and lose any hope of Odysseus' return. That's when Penelope's faith starts wavering a little bit, but she delays her choice as much as possible, dreading the day she left to choose one of these horrible men. She also opposes Telemachus' desire to become king because she fears for his safety, already threatened by the many pretenders who wants to basically pretty much eliminate any natural heir to the throne. Now, what is remarkable about Penelope is how strong his faith in Odysseus is. And even when everyone else had pretty much lost hope, she still clings to the faint hope that, it would suddenly reappear. She was rewarded in the end, obviously, where she could finally reunite with her beloved husband and happily go into exile with him, removing the curse from Ithaca and their son. So in a way, even though they were together not for long with the whole family with Telemachus, it's still in a way a happy ending because everyone gets what they want. Telemachus becomes king, Penelope is reunited with Odysseus, and Odysseus sails for new adventure. So I would say that in the end it's a very wholesome ending. Now, all these years of dangerous adventure and painful waitings are perfectly symbolized by the gold pin Penelope gives Odysseus, which is basically a token with Athena's features that shall bring wisdom to Odysseus during his journey and hope and patience to Penelope while he's away and she's waiting for him. Again, this is another moment that is beautifully paid off in the end when Penelope recognizes Odysseus as her real husband. Because, well, first of all, he, even if he was disguised as a beggar, he was holding onto that gold pin for dear life, and he could describe perfectly what was the pin like. Now, I could talk for hours about, the emotional moments in this movie, but the last one I wanted to mention, which I think is actually really, really cool and really touching moment, is, of course, Argo, Odysseus' dog, which is the best dog any man could ever have. Now, Odysseus chose him as a puppy to help him hunting, and Argo obviously adored his master. So, like everyone else, was heartbroken when he didn't return home. And he waited and waited, and he was mistreated by many people. Everyone thought he was gonna die anytime, but he survived 20 years, which is mind-boggling for a dog, just to see his master back. Then he wagged his tail one last time, happy to see that his master was back home, and then he just died. Now, that was really beautiful, and I have to say I shed a few tears at the moment. Now, this was in a way, the easy part of the review, because these are the things that I really liked about this movie. Now, I need to get into the tough part of the review, which is also obvious because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I briefly mentioned that upon the movie announcement, there were many controversies, which is important to address. Some of them are justified, and some of them I think they were blown way out of proportion. But let's go in order. Now, I want to start with the ones that I think they were completely blown out of proportion, which again is no particular order. The race swap of Eleanor Troy, I don't think it was particularly meaningful to the story, though I still found her characters and the actress playing her quite insufferable. But that's not important in this review. Now, I'll cut some slack to this decision because, considering what she's been through, and also the reason I don't think it wasn't that big a deal is because you can also think of Greece as a big hub, with people coming from different places, like from Europe, from North Africa, Asia, etc. So the fact that she's black, although it's probably not the way Homer imagined her, but it's not completely out of question. That's why also it didn't really took me out of the movie. Now, about another controversy, which was Travis Scott as the Bard, because ancient poetry, in Nolan's words, is analogous to rap. Sure. Honestly, it's such like a small, inoffensive presence in the movie that you barely notice him. So again, it's not something that really took me out of the movie. Travis Scott looked genuinely happy to be there, in a Nolan movie. So I don't know, I kind of like his part. It's fine. It's no big deal. Now, the other critique I heard was that the movie was a slug. Actually, many critics said that it was boring, they fell asleep, whatever. I actually disagree. I thought, I was immersed into the movie straight away, and I didn't find myself bored, wanting to reach for my phone or anything. I think Nolan masterfully blended dialogue, slow moments of reflection, and also exciting action. So I didn't think the pacing was actually a big issue in the movie. Now, standout scenes, I would say, were definitely the one with Cersei, which I thought it was very, very creepy, although it was resolved a bit too quickly. But still, it's the kind of scene that it would give nightmares to a lot of people. The memories of the Trojan War also add great context to Odysseus' motivations, and also the way he matured and transformed as a person. And also the reunion, between the king and queen of Ithaca was very emotionally dense. Many also mentioned the sound mixing of Nolan, which apparently is one of his greatest weaknesses as a director. Now, to be fair here, guys, my ears are not really that refined that I can pick up on these things. I thought the sound was fine. I didn't notice anything weird, in the dialogue being too low or the action scenes being too high. So I can't really speak about that. So if you have any insight on that, please leave it in the comments so I can look into it. Now, about the color and tone of the movie, now I'll agree that this is not gonna be everyone's cup of tea, but if you go watch a Nolan's movie, you should know what you're getting yourself into, because that was exactly what I was expecting. So I was not surprised. Again, that doesn't mean that I liked it the whole time, but it didn't come as a shock. The bleak, grounded reality, also the grounded storytelling, the analytical storytelling is a trademark of Nolan. So it was no surprise there, and also it kind of suited his rendition of the Odyssey. It would have been weird see Nolan doing a heartwarming, light-hearted and colorful version of the Odyssey. Last but not least, the lack of Greek people argument. I thought it was very weak to begin with. It is an international production made for everyone to enjoy. So if you, in this case, you just want the best actors for the job, chosen on merit, not nationality. Although Nolan's choices in this case are a bit of a hit or miss, so I'll give you that. The fact is that an actor is just a vessel for the story. So you want, if they're really good actors, they understand how to capture the essence of a character, even if they don't look like it. And, in every movie, like, the fact is that today you almost see like more attention to pick up the right name. So it's almost like you just want the biggest name in the industry rather than actors who can actually do the job the best. But I don't know, like you want someone who can actually disappear behind the role, and which again is not always achieved here, I think, because it's such a star-studded cast that sometimes you just see, I don't know, like Matt Damon being Matt Damon, Tom Holland being Tom Holland, or rather Peter Parker, and so on. I don't know, I felt like the argument about only having Greek people in the movie was actually very limiting, because they're not necessarily the best parts of the job. Sure, they would pass as Greek 100%, definitely more than Matt Damon, which is of Nordic extraction, and Travis Scott or whatever. So at least I would say the resemblance would be more effective. But that's not the thing that took me out of the story. Now, that was about this section. So those are the controversies that I think were blown out of proportion. So they totally didn't deserve the hate they got. Now let's get into the controversies which I think were completely justified. Of course, I had to start with Elliot Page. It was coming. I had to address it. Now, I would say Elliot Page is embarrassingly miscast as Sinan. Not just because Sinan is not even part of the Odyssey, because it's a character that appears in a completely different poem, but because basically he acts as a proxy for Achilles. So not just they introduced a character that wasn't even in the original story, but we were also robbed of the Achilles scenes. Plus, I would say it was embarrassing and a bit cringe to watch Elliot Page running in an armor that's like twice the size, and we have to believe that this person is like the best soldier that Odysseus had, and it's the bravest warrior, whatever. I don't know. Like, I would say that my suspension of disbelief has limits, and this choice really challenged it. Like, honestly, like, just make the comparison between Elliot Page and Brad Pitt as Achilles in Troy. Like, the difference is so stark that it is painful to watch. But again, like, I would just wanted to quickly mention this aspect, but I have a few more things to talk about in this review, so I'm gonna skip to the next one. The other controversy, which is one of the most talked about, and I wasn't surprised that it bothered me that much, was the dialogue. Now, that's one thing that nearly took me out of it. Of course, like, I wouldn't expect everyone to speak Greek or with a Greek accent, but at least using the traditional Oxford English, the Shakespearean verb that was used in other mythological movies like Troy or The Gladiator. That would have helped to give gravitas and grandeur to the movie. But using words like daddy, dad, let's go, also swearing in the movie, honestly, it was painful to watch, and I really had to focus myself on the parts of the movie that I was liking. Now, another major issue regarding this movie was the fact that it was adapted from a modern translation of the Odyssey by Emily Wilson, which is known in the space as a raging feminist. To clear any doubt, this is the typical rendition from, for modern audience that challenge patriarchal values and empowers women. The kind of work that we all love and cherish. Luckily, Nolan, I would say, doesn't linger a lot on these kind of aspects. So I think like it was greatly exaggerated, this aspect. Like it is there, you can feel it in a way, especially like it's very subtle, you can see it, but it's not like in your face too much. So I didn't find it like overly woke or overly feminist, and like some choices I'm like, all right, but it didn't really took me out of the movie that much. Now, in terms of being historically accurate, 100% I agree with that. In some regards, actually, because some parts are actually very grounded in reality, in the reality of the time at least. But yeah, that's true. Like, I don't know, things like, like the ships, the armors, they were not the way they were supposed to be at the time. But I have to say, it looked pretty cool, like especially Agamemnon's armor. Like he has such an aura with the black armor, that looks straight out of the Dark Knight. So it looked pretty cool to me. So like I'm not like a big history buff, so I don't care like if it's not the one that has to be exactly like that. No, I don't care. As long as it look cool, it fits the story, I'm fine with that. Now, same goes for the music. Sure, like Nolan is right in saying that orchestras didn't exist back then, so that's why he only uses drums. But at the same time, there were no synthesizer either. So I don't know, like a bit of consistency with your logic. But again, this is gonna be, I think, a major issue for people that are history buffs. People that care about, I would say, the lack of consistency in movies. So that's why I addressed it in this part of the review, because it's going to be a problem for a lot of people. For me personally, not so much, because I thought everything was on point. Now, if I had to pick one problem above all about the Odyssey that left a really bitter taste in my mouth, is the acting. Now, except few exceptions who really captured the essence of their characters, I would say everyone else was either mid or, I don't know, they tried, I guess, but their performance fell completely flat. And it felt like some people were just there, reading the lines, playing themselves. So that's one of the things that actually took me out of the movie a little bit. Now, I wanted to mention Anne Hathaway. No surprise, she's a standout. She's a wonderful actress. She was great at Penelope, and you could really, you really see her shine, and you really feel her pain and frustration. John Leguizamo, despite him being a bit insufferable and his take on politics, which sometimes is a bit absurd, but I think he did a wonderful job as Eumeus. Samantha Morton, again, like I'm trying to judge the acting despite the actor, so I'm trying to separate the art from the artist here. Samantha Morton was very creepy as Cersei. Robert Pattinson as Antinous was another standout, and he really played very well the part of the menacing and despicable villain, and in the end he got exactly what he deserved. Now, everyone else, including Matt Damon, was alright, I would say, or decent. Like, Matt Damon is not the worst guy for the job, but at the same time, he doesn't really scream epic hero. So I don't know. Like, if you have anyone in mind which, you thought that he could have played the part better, please let me know in the comment. Because, yeah, like I cannot think of anyone at the moment, but at the same time, Matt Damon is just, I don't know. Sometimes you feel like he was just being Matt Damon. Now, if I had to say that there's been one specific performance that blew my mind, yeah, I don't think I can say that. Like even the ones that were really, really good, none of them were really like worth the price of the ticket. So in a way, this ties in also with the tone of the movie, because you have the muted colors, the somber soundtrack, the realistic setting. To be fair, it doesn't really feel like an epic adventure. It feels more like a psychological thriller set in ancient times, where with a lot of people pretty much dealing with PTSD after the Trojan War. And apparently, sometimes you feel like it's a movie that's deprived of every joy. Yeah, I don't know. This is something that I didn't like it. It was a choice, and again, it aligns with how Nolan envisions his movies. But I don't think it was maybe the best choice for this particular body of work. By all means, so again, we're talking about Nolan, so it really doesn't come as a surprise, but it just kind of makes you wonder, like, couldn't have chosen maybe another director, someone who's more aligned with Homer's sensibilities, with ancient epic sensibilities? Who knows? Now, after all these considerations, how do I rank this movie? Well, it's complicated. So I'd say 100% it's worth watching, even if you're the most purist historian, Nolan hater person out there, because it is essentially to form your own opinion about something and not just take your opinion from online critics, but forming your own opinion after you've actually watched the movie. So if all the critics that you watched, maybe they were a big turn off for you, so just don't listen to them, just go watch the movie anyways. Now, if all the critics that I mentioned in the review, those were actually a big deal for you, again, go watch the movie, but I can't imagine you enjoying the movie very much, because some of the things that were not a big deal for me are gonna be a big deal for you, plus things that 100% are gonna be a big deal for you. So yeah, I can't imagine you liking this movie, but who knows, it might actually still surprise you. Now, if you're a Nolan boy, obviously, believe me, nothing wrong here, like no shades. You probably purchased the tickets for this movie like a year ago, and you enjoyed it, every second of it, probably watched him more than once, naturally in all its IMAX glory, which is exactly as Nolan intended. I personally enjoyed this movie, not enough to watch it a second time, but the nearly 3-hour mark also doesn't help. But as a cinema fan who also enjoys this kind of like event movies, so the quality of the production is extremely high. Okay, again, like we're talking about Nolan here, so don't go into this movie thinking that you're gonna be watching some kind of slop, because that's not the case. It's very well put together. Is brilliant with the practical effect, as you're gonna see in the Polyphemus scene, and so on. So the quality of the production is incredibly high, even for Nolan standards. But I would say it lacks the magic of the ancient epic stories. So I would say it should have felt grand, it should have felt inspiring, it should have, I don't know, like something along the lines of the Gladiator. But the problem is that the whole cast combined doesn't have an ounce of the aura of Russell Crowe. But also, like, the Gladiator had the right tone and the right atmosphere, the right music for Russell Crowe to shine as the Gladiator. Again, just like in Troy, we have no real gods here. Even Athena, in the end, we find out that it's not really Athena, it's just a kid. So they were basically substituted by the gods, by the forces of nature. It's also like there's no visible excitement for the adventure. I don't know, like Odysseus didn't really feel like the real Odysseus, which is clever, cunning. He makes sneezy remarks, like the famous like Polyphemus scenes of the who hit you, nobody, like that was absent for the movie, and I thought it should have actually like 100% been there. I would say even the passionate moments, like they're completely absent, like all the women that Odysseus has slept with, like Circe, like what's it called, like the priestess that is trapped on the beach with. Anyway, let me know in the comment. I completely forgot. Like they're all played by Charlize Theron. Anyway, if I had to explain how I feel about this movie, it's almost like they built the correct structure, okay? But so basically it looks and sound like the Odyssey should feel like, but at the same time it completely lacks the soul of Homer's poem. Now, the mistake I think was indulging way too much into Hollywood's obsession of deconstructing the classic mythos and also corrupting with modern sensitivities that really don't reflect Homer's vision. And actually, I would say that intent, it's clear, like if you watched any interviews, especially with Lupita Nyong'o, and other actresses that really brag on about the fact that Nolan gave way more space to the women. This is not told from a masculine perspective, the women really shines, blah blah blah, which actually I think it was a silly argument to begin with, because actually Homer gave a lot of time to the women in this. Like the women are a fundamental part of the story, so it's a stupid critique to begin with. Also, it's like everyone is glazing on Nolan, but then we shit on Homer, unbelievable. Now, with that being said, again, like as I mentioned before, I didn't find it overly woke or feminist. Basically, it just, I would say it's a thoroughly enjoyable movie that deals with deep themes, which is adventure, is PTSD, it's the theme of waiting, the regret for horrible actions. So the action scenes also, I would say they're mostly pretty good. I would say the one in the end where Odysseus slayed all the pretenders, it's a bit clunky, but it was okay. I've seen way worse. I don't know, there's also parts that are kind of creepy, which I actually pretty like, especially the part the beginning of the scene with Polyphemus, or the part where Circe turns men into pigs, which it was horrifying. The cinematography is obviously, and the practical effects are excellent, as you'd expect from a Nolan movie. I would just say it's the overall vibe and look of the movie, also paired with the modern dialogue, that really didn't do it for me. However, and this is the final score, I'd still give it a 7.5 out of 10, because no doubt it's worth watching and talking about it. Now, let me know in the comment what you thought of the movie, if you agree with me, what are the parts that you disagree with me. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel for more pop culture content, and I'll see you all in the next one.